Yes, sir.
This is aside from the point, but you could, I noticed you didn't bring religion into this at all. Now, I was brought up in a Lutheran church where God was everything. He knew everything, and He was responsible. He created everything, and so forth. And I just wondered about if God is so powerful, why does things happen all around the world so badly? So I was wondering if people believed in God so thoroughly, and why aren't we all in church praying for God to sin? And God is responsible for me being alive, and He created me, He created you and everybody else in the world, and all He'd have to do is change the DSA into all these people, and people would be nicer to each other. We wouldn't have this war.
What's that got to do with
If I could answer that, sir, Roy, right?
Yeah.
If I could answer that, Roy, I would be the greatest man alive. I will never have the wisdom, unfortunately, to be able to answer it. But I appreciate your question. And the one place I did explicitly mention God, or by implication, was when the pardon of Nixon came up. President Ford submitted his judgment to that of clergy. He said, advise me. Teach me more about justice. Teach me more about mercy. And he made the decision that it would be both just and merciful to pardon President Nixon, but primarily for the sake of the country. He owed it for the 220 million Americans to pardon President Nixon. And with regard to his autobiography, Time and Chance, you know, that's a phrase from the Old Testament. And President Ford was a religious man. Since President Ford lived and had his public life, we've become a culture in which many more people wear their religion on their sleeve. President Ford did not grow up doing that, and he was comfortable, just here are my beliefs, and I'm firm in my beliefs, and I don't need, and if we start talking about it, you'll know exactly where I stand, but I'm not going to make a demonstration of the beliefs in public because I don't want to forestall any conversation coming in. I don't want people to jump to conclusions. I don't want them to think that I'm going to demonize somebody. Come now, let us reason together. Let us sit down and talk to one another. So he's very careful in his rhetoric. Now, he did say this. His speeches are filled with religious references. And let me give you an example from his first speech as President of the United States. August 9th, 1974. My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over. Our Constitution works. Our great republic is a government of laws and not of men. Here the people rule. But there is a higher power, by whatever name we honor Him, who ordains not only righteousness, but love, not only justice, but mercy. He goes on to talk in religious terms. This is very Lincoln-esque. He used to say, I'm not a Lincoln, I'm a Ford. But this is very Lincoln-esque language. The next sentence, as we bind up the nation's wounds. This is Lincoln. As we bind up the internal wounds of Watergate, more painful and more poisonous than those of foreign wars. Let us restore the golden rule to our political process and let brotherly love purge our hearts of suspicion and of hate. I could go on and on. President Ford's speeches are beautiful. And for those who want to fathom, in the way Lincoln did, the ways of a mysterious God, President Ford is quite an interesting vehicle to do so.
Well, for instance, let's see, what was I going to say? Oh, I lost my point. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't think I addressed your question directly, but I did want to, I had left that out of the speech. Yes, sir.
I tend to believe not in a strong God because I don't understand God, but I believe in Jesus' teachings. But Jesus said, take care of my people.
Yes.
Well, that's just the opposite of what we're all doing now.
Well,
And I don't know how I feel about that. That's
Or
confusing.
freedom of choice.
well, I certainly, I think
That's socialistic.
you'd be a lot of fun to talk to. We ought to go to a coffee house and we could buy each other a drink and we plumb the mysteries of the universe. One more question.
Oh, well, let somebody, I got two more.
Well, I tell you what. Okay, let's have you ask one and then you.
I can ask afterward.
Go ahead. I want to, he's
You spoke about you call it comedy between, you were speaking legislatively.
Yes.
How much of that, and this is speculation again, but how much do you think that the comedy between the congressmen and people in government had to do with the shared experience of having fought in World War II
Huge.
or Korea? So you don't have to speculate about that.
I don't speculate about that. I think that, you know, I used to watch my dad when he'd go into a group of strangers, of men who were his age. They would immediately be able to talk about the war. They were a band of brothers, as Stephen Ambrose had popularized that term, but of course it comes from Henry V, Shakespeare.
Oh, yeah. St. Crispin's Day?
St. Crispin's Day, that's right. Battle of Agincourt. But, sir, may I ask you, were you at the end of World War II, or did you have...
I was in World War II.
You were, okay, well, see, I thought you were younger than that.
89.
You're such a young-looking fellow that I didn't think that you would...
I'll be 90 in another month.
Very good. Well, you are in very good shape. You're about my dad's age. My dad's a year younger than you. But it was certainly his experience to be able to go to any gathering and talk about the war, and they were bonded immediately. I used to be just amazed. I mean, my generation doesn't have anything like that. Neither does yours. And neither will yours, Alistair. It really is I think that helped them see, I mean, they had fought what they considered was a good war. They had done it together. They had beaten back the totalitarians of the 20th century, the Nazis, the Stalinists, you know, the fascists under Mussolini, the militarists under Tojo. They had beaten back these enemies of freedom. They had that special bond. They did it in their quiet, unassuming way. They didn't come home bragging about it, but they were that band of brothers who could talk about it. I think it's a beautiful thing, but I think that they were able to get along and talk to it. And yes, they would. Reagan used to say this too. He would say that he and Tip O'Neill would go at it, you know, but Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill, when he was President of the United States, Reagan would fight with him, and then afterwards these two Irishmen would go and they'd go have a drink. You know, they'd pat each other on the back and tell stories, and that's the kind of comity that used to exist in Washington, and we've lost it. And how do we get it back? That's the challenge, not for your generation. Your generation showed us the way to do it. My generation, your generation, needs to do it now. Your question? This will be the last question. Because I've got to hit the road. I don't want to drive all the way back to Grand Rapids, totally in the dark.